working for you. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Lesroy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for you is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for you.
Good afternoon, and I welcome you to another Working for You program. I am your host, Lesroy Williams. Wherever you are in St. Kitts and Nevis or whether you are abroad, we thank you very much for tuning in to this program. Today we are going to be discussing a very timely topic, that of natural disasters. We have been faced in the Caribbean, and in particular with hurricanes every year that pose a threat to lives, property, agriculture, and so on. The official hurricane season is from June 1st to November 30th. And from our own experience here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the experience of so many of our Caribbean neighbors, our Caribbean friends, who were severely impacted by Hurricane Irma and Hurricane Maria. They have stories to tell. Not happy stories, very sad stories for most part, of destruction, the loss of lives, property, the loss of friends, family, and so on. And today we will be discussing how important it is for us to prepare for hurricanes, and after a hurricane, how do we deal with how we were impacted by hurricanes. But apart from hurricanes, we are also in a zone, of course, we have the Caribbean plate and earthquakes as well. So hurricanes are not the only natural disasters that we have. We are also prone to earthquakes and so on. I have with me today two very knowledgeable persons on my panel to discuss the whole aspect of disasters, how we deal with them, and so on. I have with me Mrs. Claricia Langley Stevens, who is the Deputy National Disaster Coordinator at NEMA, that is the National Emergency Management Agency. And I have with me the Director General of the St. Kitts Nevis Red Cross, Mrs. Natalie Foe. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Okay. Mrs. Langley Stevens, I will begin with you. Of course, we have the National Emergency Management Agency, which plays a pivotal role in disasters, disaster preparedness, disaster mitigation, disaster management, and so on. Now, what is the role? Can you outline for us the role of NEMA during peacetime and during disaster?
Sure. Good afternoon, and thank you for having the agency be a part of such a timely and important discussion. The role of the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, is primarily that of coordination. At NEMA, we have a very small staff of about 9 persons, but we are expected to manage the affairs or impact of any hazard. Our most prevalent hazard that we have to deal with on an annual basis outside of earthquakes would be that of tropical cyclones and hurricanes. NEMA, like you said, in peacetime, we function in an administrative role where we are able to work with our partners and stakeholders in terms of providing the necessary training to be able to support our efforts when we have to go into a response role, such as we're dealing with now after the passage of Hurricanes Irma and Maria. One of the things that NEMA prides itself on is that we coordinate with several government organizations, entities, to be able to firstly mitigate where we can against natural hazards, as the case may be, and in some cases man-made disasters, because those two can affect us drastically. In addition, in providing that training, we also ensure that the persons who are trained are equipped. For example, we're going to look at rescue, search and rescue, which is primarily supported from the Fire Services Department. And so we ensure with our funding, external funding partners, such as USAID OFTA, that we are able to provide light search and rescue training opportunities, be it locally or regional, to be able to have that type of capacity to tap into when we need it. And so for us, training is a major part of the preparation process at the agency. Note, there are a lot of things that are involved in terms of responding to an emergency or hazard, as the case may be, and NEMA do not have the capacity. That is why we function in that coordinative role to bring all of the relevant players together to be able to assist us in getting the job done. As it relates to in times of being impacted, and I'll use hurricane as our most popular hazard.
Yes.
When we are informed by the Met Office, who is a competent authority as it relates to weather, and there is this misconception that NEMA does weather meteorological services. We do not do that, and we do not have that capability on staff. So we are heavily dependent, like everybody else, to get our data from the Met Office. And so we have been and had a lot of support from the staff, the management and staff, via Mr. Elmo Burke, who is the senior Met Officer at the Met Office, and they would inform us sometimes days in advance, once it allows, that there is something coming off the coast of Africa. It is expected to affect St. Kitts and Nevis within the next week, and once we get that information, we mobilize in terms of primarily monitoring and then ensuring that we have the necessary resources on standby, that once we need to activate or partially activate, as the case may be, we're able to do so.
Okay. Mrs. Fo.
Yes, sir.
Now, could you tell us the role of the Red Cross in general, and of course in particular, whenever there is a disaster?
Okay. Pleasant good afternoon to everyone. First, I must say that the St. Kitts and Nevis Red Cross were divided into branches and into districts. We have two branches, which is the St. Kitts branch, so the entire St. Kitts populace will be in the St. Kitts branch, and we have Nevis branch. These islands are subdivided into districts. So in St. Kitts, we have 5 districts, and they are located in Basseterre, Cayon, St. Paul's, Sandy Point, and Bircharles. In Nevis, we just have 1 district for now. They have intentions of branching off to more, and that is in Charlestown. We have on record approximately 150 volunteers, and we are seeking more, and I realize I say on record, because when the time comes, we do see them coming out, but we really need persons, we need volunteers. And I think that is the word that hamper people from coming in, the word volunteering, because you're not no pace, isn't it? Presently, what we do, we have what we call preposition supplies. So in the event that there's any cutoff anywhere, we will still have supplies to service persons in those areas. And we have at Molyneux, at the Mary Charles Hospital grounds. We have in Sandy Point, and the Sandy Point branch will take care of that, which will supply the Burchell's area and St. Paul's area when they do have their liquor supplies go down. We have in Bastyr, and we also have at the NDMD office in Nevis on the grounds there. So there's where our supplies are prepositioned. Now we have what we call a code of conduct for disaster. And in that code of conduct, we play a supportive role to government. And in that sense, our supportive role to government will be NEMA, the agency at this time. Within our national plan, within our disaster plan at Red Cross, the activation of that plan goes into effect when NEMA said yes, it's activated. Then the Director General, whoever that person is at the time, will activate our disaster plan. So it's activated, and then all volunteers fall into place. Our role during a disaster will be, after a disaster I should say, is assessment and distributions. We tend not to get too caught up with shelters, but our role for shelters will be the feeding for the first 72 hours. But if we have like shelter managers, we would not be able to do our role as Red Cross personnel effectively. So the shelters, what we do, we just do feed-ins for the first 72 hours. So whenever there's a shelter anywhere and that have been activated, that will be our role with the shelters. In peacetime, however, we have a different role, and everybody see us as first aiders, full stop. But we have quite a number of other different roles when it comes to peacetime as well. When it comes to first aid, yes, we do the first aid services to where we have large congregating of persons, but we also have training. We deliver training to agencies, organizations, etc. One of the things that we do that persons are not too aware of until when the time is right is the word tracing. With tracing, if you have somebody in the army and that person has a relative who died or about to, the Red Cross is then activated in order to get that person out of the army to come to the island for that function. Because if not, they will have a little challenge in getting back in. So we do that. We do on our training, one of the things that we need to offer, and we need to offer this to community groups, is a VCA training, which is vulnerability and capacity assessment. That will help quite a lot with the communities of getting their history of the community and getting persons involved in the community to know what we call a seasonal calendar, to know what was happening then in the year, the 12 months of the year, which ones are more active in certain activities. So that's one we're going to make sure that we push that into the communities, and that also has in climate change. And it has a GPS now that we activate it. So those are things that that we do peacetime and during a disaster.
Okay, what type of training is your staff given? Because they too would have to have some training in terms of how to deal with post-disasters and
Right now, we do quite a number of training as well in-house. We have first aid, which is they must be first aid trained. We do VCA as well. They have to be VCA trained as well. We also do a very new one that we have just coming on the market, which is ODK. And this is how we take assessments now when we go in the field. We use the phone, there's an app that we use, and immediately the information go back to a server. So you have real-time information and things that you would not be able to easily access when you're just doing an assessment. So that one, we are going through that kind of training, and we're going to be offering that training as well to NEMA. So we'll be able to be on the same page when we go to doing the assessment outside.
Okay. Now, what kind of supplies do you provide at the Red Cross in disaster? What?
Well, when we do our assessments, everybody won't get the same thing. But when we do the assessment, we'll indicate as to who will need what. The type of supplies we have, like after disaster, We might have plastic sheetings, as everybody will call it. We call it tarpaulins because they're individually wrapped. We have that. We have blankets. We have kitchen sets. We have hygiene kits. Okay, those are things that we have on hand. We have buckets that you can store your water in. We have what we call jerry cans. They are 5-gallon water containers. So we have those kind of things that we can assist the public with just prior to a disaster. So they will be able to make sure that they have something on hand. Because you need to store your water, and that's one of the things that persons really need to ensure that is done.
Okay. Now, Mrs. Stevens, whenever you have a disaster, you have to mobilize people and so on. And, you know, we live in districts, in parishes, and so on. What is the district management mechanism, and how does it work and affect us here in St. Kitts and Nevis?
Okay. So NEMA, because we are such a small staff, to be able to respond to the needs of the country, we had to initiate a volunteer program. Now, this volunteer program is not new. It is older than all of us in the room. But the NEMA has sought to more or less formalize the volunteer process through registration and identification and so forth. We start that volunteer program by firstly dividing the island of St. Kitts in particular into districts, and we use very simply, so that persons do not get confused, the electoral boundaries or lines of demarcation. And so technically whatever is constituency number 1 by NEMA standards become district number 1, so persons can, you know, be able to understand what district they live or work in. And then with that mechanism in place, it needed to be managed, and we couldn't do that from NEMA's end. So we had the communities that make up the various districts come together and formulate what we refer to as the District Management Committee. Each committee somewhat mirrors the national mechanism as it relates to the national plan, where there is someone identified as a chair, there is a deputy chair, there is someone responsible for shelter management, there's someone for transportation, logistics, community development, you name it, and that person sits there, as well as the other persons who may not be position holders, but they're there to support whatever the district is called out to do. One of the main roles of the district is to keep the agency informed as to what is happening at a community level, but more so they are also challenged to create programs to support NEMA's national plan to be able to help to develop these communities to similarly to what Mrs. Foss said, to identify their vulnerabilities, know what are some of the things that will affect you if a storm had to come. For example, we must know the communities that are prone to flooding, communities that are located on the low-lying areas of the coastline, and things of that nature. And we do that by lending the district committees support in terms of community mapping. And so they take charge of all of that. Particularly, they have to register with the agency via an application process, and then it is the intention in the not too distant future for NEMA to reissue, because it was done already, new identification cards indicating their name, their districts, what are some of the areas of training that they may have. Also, we are able to design training specifically for districts and communities based on some of the known vulnerabilities and needs, and so they help us so that we can help them. A lot of our training is done not only for staff but for our volunteers, and the most popular training that is being done at the community level is that of CERTs, and we have 2 types now. one with the C and the other with an S. The C is the Community Emergency Response Team, and they have training in very basic areas to include but not limited to basic first aid, CPR. They also do light search and rescue, and they are the ones, our volunteers are the ones who do the post-hazard needs assessment after we would have been impacted, providing data to NEMA to be able to share with the damage assessment committee to be able to, formulate the figures of how many households or families would have been affected. And so that's where some of the data come from. So they play a very integral role. Once we know that we are being impacted by any hazard, and even in peacetime, we try to let the public know or make them aware of who their district managers are, the assistant managers, and how they're able to get in touch with them. Sometimes we intensify that when we know that a storm is approaching or imminent, as the case may be, and we share their contact numbers. It's their personal number, but because they signed on to the volunteer program, automatically it becomes a public number. And for that we are very grateful, because a lot of what we achieve pre and post hazard is heavily dependent on the involvement of our national volunteers, which we ensure that they are adequately trained to address the areas that they are assigned to.
Okay, now, during a disaster, a hurricane, let's use the example of a hurricane, shelters become necessary. Those shelters have to be managed. How do you manage those shelters during a hurricane?
So first we are going to start with what happens prior to the start of the hurricane season, or prior to being impacted. You see, a lot of people are but there's a myth that exists that the shelters are only for hurricane purposes, and that couldn't be furthest from the truth. Because if a shelter has to be activated because a community was completely flooded, we will have to activate the shelters. However, as it relates to the hurricane season, it has not been the practice of St. Kitts and Nevis to open shelters before we are impacted. And so the government has decided that prior to a storm approaching St. Kitts and Nevis, we will activate a few shelters, not all, and they're going to be strategically located within each district around the island. And what that does, it provides an opportunity for persons who feel that they're vulnerable or their homes may not withstand what type of winds the storm will, deposit on St. Kitts and Nevis, or rain, as the case may be, that their homes may not be, well suited to absorb all of that. And so as a precautionary measure, they venture to the shelters. You also have persons who they are of the vulnerable group. You have persons who are homeless, who want that type of shelter, because on a normal rainy day they can go someplace and shelter, but in this case where it is being announced that we need to take precaution and persons to be safe, and so they venture to the shelter, and we welcome everybody. The only thing not welcome in a shelter is your pet. We haven't gotten there yet. I'm sure one day we will eventually. The shelter mechanism, the opening of a shelter is not a NEMA decision. That is done from a mitigation level, and the Mitigation Council of St. Kitts and Nevis is chaired by the Deputy Prime Minister by virtue of the post that individual hold. And so NEMA, over the last 2-3 storms that we were preparing for and impacted by 2, the Honorable Sean Richards, Deputy Prime Minister, took the decision with support from his cabinet to activate 1 shelter per district, with the exception of district number 8 because of its layout. They were able to have 2, one in Keon and one in St. Peter's. Now, our volunteers who are trained as shelter managers, they're the ones who man the shelters. So while everybody else is at home in their comfortable homes, these persons are out and ensuring that the shelter has what it needs to accommodate, and not necessarily to make them comfortable, but to give them that level of assurance and security that you should be okay in this facility. Our shelters are not just handpicked. There is a national committee that is chaired by the Permanent Secretary of Housing, and they have the awesome responsibility to identify suitable spaces, including privately owned facilities as well as the government's community centers. And they need to be assessed because a shelter must have certain things. It must be constructed in a particular, must be able to withstand up to a category 4 hurricane. It must also have water storage facilities, and so these are some of the things that we look at in terms of a building being approved for sheltering purposes. The thing, I think the critical thing for NEMA is for persons in the community to know where the shelters are, that in the event that they didn't evacuate prior to the storm and it had to be done during, that they know exactly where they're heading or running to, as the case may be. And so for us that is important.
Okay. Now, Mrs. Ford, when you have to do an assessment, how can people actually apply to the Red Cross or access the Red Cross if they need help? What's the process?
You mean
What's the procedure?
After we've done the assessment?
Huh?
After we have done the assessment? Or before?
Before and after the disaster.
Okay. What we do in our initial assessment is that we work with immediate needs at the same time. We might have tarpaulins and blankets, and those are the two things that we'll take with us during that time, because we will know some persons will need immediate needs. And for example, when we're doing in the Sadlers area, Sadlers and Mansion area, we noticed that there were persons here who like hands up in the air, and all they thought of, so we don't know where else to go. And when we drove by and we gave them some tarpaulins, so their faces changed. And so we didn't look at the Red Cross to be giving us this. We're looking at Red Cross to just do first aid. So yes, those are things that we take around with us in the immediate assessment. We do what we call a rapid immediate assessment, because we have to get things off within 24 hours. So you have a 24 hours assessment, you have a 72 hours assessment. So in our initial assessment, that's what we do. But before I go on with that, I just need to tap into what Clarissa just mentioned. Just add one or two things. One of the things that the Red Cross advocate for persons is to have what we call a family disaster plan. Each household should have a family disaster plan. And every single person in the house, I'm not saying that you have a baby in a crib that because that person can't do anything, they're relying on you. But every person in the house should have their own chores. You know a hurricane don't come overnight. You know it's coming 2-3 days ahead. Therefore, this person will be the person who maybe makes sure that all the things outside, the chairs and everything that might fly away, those things are secured. Somebody else will be tasked with ensuring the gas line, the gas is turned off based on where it is. If it is out of the elements, make sure it's turned off. So everybody should have their chores to do. So we need a family disaster plan. Red Cross advocate for that. And we're going to go again, house to house, make sure that persons have a disaster plan. And in order to get it in the households, we need to go into the schools with it for them to take it back home. The other thing I need to touch base on is what we call the buddy system. I think we're getting away from that. And everybody is asking where the shelter is. And not thinking about, okay, my next door neighbor, I think my house can withstand whatever. And my next door neighbor, she's more vulnerable or he's more vulnerable and they can stay with me for the night. And that kind of buddy system, we are getting away from it. Family members also should take care of their families. We have quite a lot of vulnerable persons out there who have relatives. But they need to take care of them. They know the storm is coming. They know the person live alone. Take them with you prior to the storm. Make them feel comfortable that they are wanted. They have relatives who are looking out for them. And we need to get that back outside there, of having that body system back up, having family taking care of their members.
Okay, good. Now, during a hurricane, as we see in the past, Irma and Maria, we had to activate the National Emergency Operations Center. Now, what is required to activate it?
A threat. Yes, to activate the National Emergency Operations Center, the threat must be imminent, because the Emergency Operations Center is the brain of the operations in terms of being able to manage an emergency situation, or to be able to respond as the case may be. The Operations Center on St. Kitts and also on Nevis, they're housed at the disaster offices. And so for St. Kitts, that is NEMA at Limekeel, and for Nevis, it is at the NDMD office, Long Point, Nevis. The Op Center is outfitted with the necessary technology to be able to facilitate the various entities that would sit in there to make decisions as we go through the storm. And included there, you would have the operations manager, who is usually a security personnel. In this case, our operations manager is a senior police officer, and on Nevis, it's also a senior police officer. And then around the table, to be able to respond, you have entities such as Red Cross sitting right next to me. We have the Met Office, we have SCELEC, the Water Services Department, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we have the Ministry of Health, we have SKNIS, and over the last two storms, I've had the privilege of working with you, Mr. Williams, as that person to be able to deliver real-time any important information or messages that we felt needed to reach the general public. We also had the community and social development persons who had responsibility for shelter management and welfare services on the island. We also had Public Works, who deals with damage assessment, needs assessment, and then we had the Fire Services Department, Search and Rescue. We had Defense Force. We had support from the Ham Radio Society of St. Kitts and Nevis in terms of our radio room operations. And we have administrative support from police as well as observer status. And all of that operation is manned by NEMA's deputy chair in terms of activation. And what happens is that all of these representatives have to send someone once it is activated or the NEOC is stood up, and they sit there during the passage of the entire storm. So if it takes 3 days for that storm to pass, they're there for 3 days to be able to manage the affairs of whatever might become necessary for us to be able to meet the needs of the people, meet the needs of the nation, to identify what our immediate needs are, while at the same time coming up with our damage assessment overview, an initial overview, which is a quick snapshot as to where we sustain damages and what type of support might be necessary for that needs list to be developed by the agency. The operations is not anything that we are foreign to, because what we do in the ops room is what we do on a daily basis. It is just that we need to have access to that type of information real time, or that type of decision making authority real time, so that if a decision needs to be taken, it can be taken right away. We don't have to call anybody to ask for permission. That type of authority is in the ops center. And I think for me, that's why I refer to it as the brain of the operation, because it works very well in terms of being able to respond.
Could you tell us who some of the key stakeholders on this NEOC, the ministries on it?
So the ministries that are supported would be Ministry of National Security, is the dominating ministry because it has responsibility for NEMA, the police, defense force, fire and rescue services, and they all sit there within the NEOC. You also have Community and Social Development. You have the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, public utilities, which includes Water Services Department, and transportation. Transportation for us is very critical because sometimes when persons call the up center for an emergency evacuation, we need to have access to a vehicle, and not just a vehicle, maybe it would be a four-wheel drive vehicle. And so government pool all their resources into one area, and we identify drivers, and then they deploy to address an urgent matter. So I think all of the entities that represented, Skelec is also there, but Skelec is a private company, and they do very well. I think one of the misconceptions of Skelec sitting in the NEOC is that persons think that when they call and say we have a down post or a down line, that Skelec is going to leave the NEOC and go and address that immediately. It doesn't quite work like that, because we also have to look at the safety of the persons who are responding as well. And so what Skelec does is that they note what some of these concerns are, the addresses, and they log it. And as soon as the all clear is issued, these become priority areas as they start the repairing and the cleanup process.
So before the all clear is declared, there has to be some sort of a rapid assessment.
That's right.
And after the rapid assessment, then the all clear. Now, what does all clear mean?
So firstly, the all clear is issued only when the Deputy Prime Minister receives information from the damage assessment team, which is supported by Public Works Department, that firstly the main road is cleared of debris, fallen down lines and posts, and anything else that may become a hamper to moving vehicles or pedestrians, as the case may be, because we have to look out for their safety first. And immediately after a storm, one of the first things you look out and you see is downed lines running across the road or something, and we don't know if they have electricity in them, and so all of that is a part of the process. Once they are satisfied that it is safe for those main areas to be used, particularly the main road, then they will indicate via reporting that, we feel it is okay, it's safe. We're not looking at the alleys and the byways and so forth that persons use to get to and from their homes. Once that is satisfied, then they will indicate that they feel that it is, okay to issue the all clear. And the all clear simply means it is okay for you to come out and roam about. And, we have a tendency, and I think it's in the Caribbean, not just in St. Kitts, as soon as a storm passes, we behave like tourists. We go sightseeing, and we don't care how dangerous the area is. And in this case, for example, we can use Old Road Bay, because I had the I wouldn't want to call it a privilege, but I accompanied the security team and some assessment persons to go there and look at the condition of the road to see very early o'clock if we need to determine that area as a dangerous site, which it was. We thought it was, okay to venture to get that quick assessment done, and I was covered completely by a wave. And I'm saying I don't understand why people are putting themselves in harm's way just to get a glimpse of what we know. Sometimes those be one of the first areas to be affected when a storm comes and it affects the coastline, which is Old Road Bay. And for days it was impassable, but we were able to shut it down very quickly from the up center and created barricades and provided security, because that's how serious it was. In terms of how it was affected. The all clear, some people don't wait for the all clear, but the agency would want to strongly advise persons that once you do not get the all clear, it means that we are saying something may not be okay for you to venture out. And we are looking at the safety and the well-being of human beings, because safety comes first in our book, whether it is before, during, or after. And so we encourage persons to wait for the all clear. Only the essential workers are allowed out, and they're not usually allowed out without that type of security or guidance, as the case may be, as to where it might be safe to venture. And so there's still that level of communication. But the all clear is very important. It's important people understand what it means and to not take it for granted, because if we do not issue an all clear and an incident had to happen, it puts the agency and the responding agencies and the government by extension in a very bad position. So we hope people, take to the understanding of what the all clear means.
You have some people who try to play heroes, and who are daredevils, and who basically want to challenge nature.
Yes, we do.
And the power of nature. And we have seen what that results in.
Yes, we have.
Okay.
Yes, we have. And you see, because it wasn't as evident on St. Kitts and Nevis, I think we take it for granted that we really didn't get a hurricane, as the case may be. But I don't think we wanted to be nowhere in a position to be compared with Dominica, because the site in Dominica is just really horrible. I don't know. I don't think Dominica will ever look the same again, and it would take them not months but years to be able to get back almost to near normalcy. And I think we have so much to be thankful for. And I find myself recognizing that in St. Kitts and Nevis we have a lot of hurricane junkies, as the case may be. They just love hurricanes, and I don't think they fully grasp how dangerous these storms can be. I mean, look at it. In 2 weeks' time, St. Kitts and Nevis had to brace for the threat of 3, but we were impacted by 2. And I don't know what would have happened if we were even impacted by Jose, because if we were impacted by Jose, we were already weakened by Irma, and to be impacted by Jose and had to deal with a 3rd storm, we would have been in a very bad place. So I am very thankful that we weren't impacted nowhere near how we anticipated it, because I think it puts us in a very good position to be able to allow St. Kitts and Nevis to get back to a state of normalcy in the shortest possible time.
Sure. Now, Mrs. Fo, after a disaster, sometimes the things that we preoccupy ourselves with, of course, is the loss of or damage to property, damage to homes. Of course, there's loss of life, but there's also a lot of issues related to health, because there might not be clean water. People might not have medicine. Mosquitoes, in the case of hurricanes, the threat of getting some of those mosquito-borne illnesses and so on. Does the Red Cross work along with the Ministry of Health?
I'm happy to hear you say the latter, the mosquitoes, because we are doing a project right now with the Ministry of Health as a partner, and with them, the Zika project. And one of the things we got in our stockpile is some mosquito nets. So we're going to look into that area as to how can we add in those persons who will really need them, because one of our main thing is the most vulnerable. That's where we focus our distribution, that's where we focus our ideas. Now, we are answerable here in the St. Kitts and Nevis Red Cross to somebody higher up. And we are answerable to our head office, which is located in Trinidad, the IFRC, which is the International Federation of Red Cross. Because we were able to get our supplies restocked during Maria. After Maria, we were able to get our supplies restocked. And because even though it was not declared a disaster, we used the opportunity of restocking our supplies. So replenishing what we had. That's why they were able to get in here. So we were able to assist with tarpaulins. We assist, but even though we assisted in such a great way that we thought, it almost looked like as though it was just a drop in the bucket. because there are a number of persons still out there that really need tarpaulins. And as Red Crossers, when we tell somebody, sorry, we can't help you, we feel really, really bad inside because that's not what we're accustomed to do. We love to see the smile on people's faces. But when we say we can't help, we can't. But we're looking into the Zika project. We are in it, and there is an extension. It should have been completed this month. But they're now looking at an extension which will take us into March. And that will allow us to really go out there. We're looking at what we call the PSP, which is the psychosocial support area. You might think, well, that is something that was overlooked in Hurricane George. And we also have to think about psychosocial support for the staff that is working as well. Because they can be overworked and you don't realize it. So we have to think about that. So we're looking at psychosocial support for this kind of Zika project. And we are focusing, we're going next week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, to some of the health centers. So we are working on that.
So you're also involved in health promotion and prevention?
Yes.
We are addressing stigma, of course, in some...
Yes. Oh yes. That's one of our top priority when it comes to stigmatization. But we're working with
and community development, of course, enabling community development.
Yes. We're focusing really on educational process. And when people hear mosquitoes and they hear something add to it like Zika, dengue, etc., they're thinking about, okay, so why don't I see anybody coming and fogging around? That's the first thing they will think about. But we, Red Cross, do not promote fogging. Fogging is last resort. What we want to promote? Preventions. Because if there are any preventions, you won't need the fogging. You prevent the mosquitoes. And because we have all that heavy rain that we just passed, you might have some utensils that was there, unnoticed, tires, etc., the plants, things that could have gathered water. And because of your continuous day-to-day critical personal matters, you might tend to overlook them. So we need to get back around there to persons to ensure that we don't have that upcreep of mosquitoes again in the areas.
Okay, good. Now, Mrs. Langley Stevens, the media plays a crucial role in terms of disasters before, during, and after any disaster. How does NEMA partner with the media in terms of getting information out to the public?
Thank you so much for that question. Because before, as it relates to media, in-house at the agency, we have a public relations officer who, before we are impacted, would have already established that line of communication with the media houses. And we're talking about the press, social media, the traditional radio stations, television. And so we've established that. All of the medias has been furnished with the NEMA's jingle tagline, as the case maybe. Everybody know, everybody beware, you better prepare. And once you hear that jingle, you know there is something coming from the agency. Now, before the storm, I can attest to the fact that we have an excellent partnership with the media houses. We have some of them on speed dial, and some of them have us on speed dial. Sometimes, they feel information is not coming fast enough, and they're able to reach out to us to get that one-on-one conversation. Anything that we need to share immediately, we have access to that. And so I really want to commend the media for allowing NEMA to play such an integral role in terms of educating their listeners. As it relates to media, though, I think one of our downfalls is that one of the first things outside of the poles that get hit and to shut down is right next to that you would find the media, because if they lose power at the antenna and the generators do not work, then it means that a lot of these stations are going to be off the air. That was a big challenge for us as it relates to Hurricane Maria. because we had a lot of information that was being disseminated, but persons who lived in the rural sides could not get access to that information because the radio stations were down. So what we did, we sort of we kind of went to social media as a platform to be able to help. So whatever was sent to the traditional media, we were able to get it into a WhatsAppable, and then everybody in the office, when I said make this WhatsAppable so that we can share it, because information on WhatsApp shares like wildfire, good, bad, or indifferent. And so we make it in a WhatsAppable form, and we send it out, and we in turn request that it be shared. And so we found that we were still able to get that out. But coupled with media, we were also able to work very closely, and I really want to commend the two major telecommunication service providers on the island, which is Digicel and Flow. We were able to work very closely with them in terms of designing messages to their customers about the approaching storms, reminding them of important things that they can do before a storm to be able to prepare. After we were able to share things with them. For me, I think that is it was actually the first time since I've been at the agency that was done, and it worked. I think it worked well for both us as an agency with that type of critical information to share, but also for the persons receiving the information, because we know that they have access to that type of and we anticipate action. And I can tell you that we've seen a change in the behavior of the general public. They were taking the necessary precautions, and they were doing as advised and so forth. And so we felt that allowed us to be able to reach more people within a reasonable time, and for that we are very grateful.
Okay. We have the Senior Met Officer, Mr. Elmer Burke, who is online, and he's going to give some input in terms of hurricanes and so on. Mr. Burke, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. Well, as everybody would have known, we would have been impacted recently by Hurricane Irma and Maria within, I think, about 2 weeks span. Hurricane Irma would have passed slightly to our north, whereas Hurricane Maria would have passed slightly to our south. In both cases, we would have received sustained winds of tropical storm force strength. However, from Hurricane Maria, we would have received tropical storm force winds for a longer period of time. So the effect would have been greater in terms of wind. Also from Hurricane Maria, recognizing that it would have passed to the south of us, we would have been on the northern side or the right-hand side of the storm, which is usually the stronger part of the storm. This generated significant wave, which caused serious coastal erosion and coastal impact here in St. Kitts and Nevis.
Okay, now, Mr. Burke, could you tell us what is the difference between a Category 1, a Category 2, Category 3, 4, 5 hurricane?
Well, the categories are based on the intensity. For example, Category 1, you're looking at wind speeds of 74 to 96 miles per hour, 95 miles per hour, sorry. Whereas a Category 2 would be 96 to 110. Category 3, which is begins the major hurricane strength, you're looking at 111 to 129. Category 4 is 130 to 156. And Category 5 is anything which is greater than 150 miles per hour. And these categories would kind of give you an indication of what are the probable impacts that you are likely to see from the hurricane.
Okay, now, there's a lot of talk about climate change and how climate change is actually affecting the type of storms and disasters that we are seeing today. Now, what is climate change and what is its influence on hurricanes?
Well, climate change, to put it simple, is basically a change in the climate that is directly or indirectly attributed to the action of man, and it results in a change in the composition of the atmosphere. What we recognize, and the scientific evidence has indicated, that climate change is going to impact the intensity of hurricanes. So what we're now seeing is more and more stronger hurricanes. So more and more major hurricanes are expected due to climate change. That's one of the effects.
Okay, now, could you tell us what are the stages of tropical cyclone development?
Well, usually in tropical cyclone development, you would normally start with a disturbance, whether it be a tropical wave or trough, and then that develops. Once you get more and more organization, then you move into what we call a depression. However, in a depression, you would not have a closed circular motion in terms of the wind flow. Winds are usually less than 38 miles per hour and less. Then when you now move into the tropical storm force, which is the next category, you're looking at a more defined, a more organized system where you have a closed center in terms of flow, circular motion, and you have wind speeds from 39 to 73 miles per hour, and then you move into the hurricane.
Okay, now what is the difference between weather and climate? People often mix them up.
Well, weather is just a simple description of the atmosphere of a particular place at a particular time, whereas climate is the average of the weather conditions over a long period of time, usually years. So, for example, we might say the weather for St. Kitts for today is sunny or partly cloudy thereabout, whereas we might say generally the climate for St. Kitts and Nevis is a warm tropical climate.
Okay.
Because we would have averaged the weather conditions over a long period of time.
So the climate is over a long period of time, and the weather is something that is more short term.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, Mr. Burke, I want to thank you so much for calling in and sharing in terms of hurricanes. Oh, before you leave, one question I have to ask. What are some of the impacts of hurricanes?
Some of the impacts you're going to have from any hurricane. We remember the hurricane, you usually have several components. So you have the wind component, you have the sea component, as well as you have the rain component. So from the wind component, you can have down power lines affecting on the islands. You can have trees being uprooted, damage to structure, and the categories in terms of category 1, 2, 3 to 5. The higher up you go, the more intense in terms of the destruction that is expected or likely to happen.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Burke.
You're welcome.
Now we are going to go to the phone lines. We want to hear from you and what your questions are. So we are going to open up the lines, and the numbers to call are 465-2555. That's the local number, 465-2555. And the overseas number is 1-718-577-2916. That is 1-718-577-2916. We welcome your calls. No one is on the line. Clarissa, I want to ask you, what does the assessment process at NEMA entail? And if people need to get supplies and so on, what is the process that they have to go through?
So the post-hazard needs assessment, which is what it is rightfully entitled, noting that it's not only for hurricanes, but in this case we are speaking about Hurricane Irma and Maria. And our volunteers are the ones who are charged with the responsibility supported by Red Cross and the Public Works Department and Community and Social Development in terms of using this tool to be able to gather information about respective households and families in terms of what type of damages did they sustain and what type of support would they be requiring. One of the main things, a lot of people are of the thinking that the post-hazard is what you do to get a tarpaulin. That's not the case, because we don't need to assess you to know whether or not you need a tarpaulin. We only have to visit your house or your home, and we will see that there are damages, and as a temporary measure in terms of sheltering, we would offer the tarpaulin. What the assessment does is provides the government via NEMA with the information that we need.
We have someone on the line.
Okay, sure.
Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon, sir.
And good afternoon to the good lady there from Nima.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon. Well, you know that as these two hurricanes just passed, Hurricane Omar and Hurricane Maria, and they left us with some damage here, especially those low-income project house, and some people get damaged differently in their own house when they own. And to be truthful, what I would like to see, that when NEMA make any contribution, giving out anything, they go to the people who really get damaged, to assist them. Because most of the time, like after Hurricane George, I remember that my roof gets shook up and everything. And I got to fix my roof on my own. I went to NEMA for some assistance, and I never get an assistance because I was paying a mortgage for the house still. But after after everything is over, a lot of materials get thrown up in it to get rotten, and they got to dump them over Canary. And I hope that is not like the situation like how we happened in the past. I would like to the people who really get damaged get these materials and fix the house immediately. Because some people, I don't think some people house get damaged, and they're gonna put in for estimation or whatever. I want you all come around, or send your officers them around, and we'll make sure that you see that who roof damage from who roof in damage. Because some people deliberately do those things, and that is bad. Let the materials them go to who? The people them who get damaged. Anyway, good program.
Okay, thank you. Working for you, good afternoon. There's no one on the line. Could you go ahead?
So just to segue into what the caller just said, and I want to thank the caller for sharing his view. One of the things that the assessment also entails is an observation. So you have to go and observe that what the person said is the damage they sustain is what actually exists. One of the challenges we face is that sometimes there's some people who don't wait. They don't wait on the government for assistance. Once something happens to their property, they go and they try and fix it on their own almost immediately. And maybe sometimes in this case it's a good thing, because after Irma we went straight into Maria. So
Working for you, good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you, Les Roy.
Good afternoon, sir.
And good afternoon to your two special guests, highly professional ladies. That is what you have on this program this afternoon, and it's so well timely. I am happy when Ms. Stevens pressed her professional way in saying something this afternoon, and that happened to be about forecasting. Weather forecasting, and when she said the competent authority is the Meteorological Services at Bradshaw, whose CASPER responsibilities lie with. Here we have a problem with Les Roy, and I did not hear it come out on this program. There are a few people out here who was given weather information at 1, 2, 3 sources,
And I believe government, whoever is responsible to stop it and stop it now, are the only competent authority. You just spoke to him. You just spoke to that competent authority. And Nima said, who is that competent authority? And I believe that is where it should stay, that is where it should narrow down. No further than that. That information needs to be disseminated. Secondly, Lesroy, you failed to ask Mr. Burke a simple question. What is a hurricane? Because you see, again, you had information out there with people who saying all kinds of things. Mr. Burke said, how many nautical miles the last hurricane was from St. Kitts. And I like the language that Mr. Stevens used, the impact it had. But the truth is, from my layman knowledge, we didn't have a hurricane. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Okay. Now he seemed to raise the issue of working for you. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Lesroy and your guests there, Mrs. Stevens and Mrs. Foe. I just want to congratulate the NEMA office and the Red Cross office, the work that they have done in the past couple of weeks. I had the opportunity of interacting with Miss Stevens and also Mr. Burke, and I think they have done a wonderful job, very professional in what they're doing, and I tip my hat to them because it's not easy for any agency to be able to do the kind of work that they have done. You have to be highly professional and know exactly what you're doing within the different communities. So, Mr. Stevens, this is Val. Y'all take care and God bless. Continue the work that y'all are doing. Mr. Burke, also to you, sir. Take care. God bless.
Okay. Now he was touching the issue of everybody. Another caller. Working for you. Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon. I would like to congratulate Natalie Foe on the good job she done in Red Cross. She's always done a fantastic job. I would like to comment her very well. Also to Nemo. Thanks to Nemo. Thanks to Red Cross. Enjoy your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Working for you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Williams.
Good afternoon,
And you and
Jamdal.
your panel and Nemo, who do such a good work during them two terrible storms. Mr. Williams, my question.
Go ahead.
I would like to ask the people at Nemo, why is it they don't pick people who is genuine when a hurricane to give out any little thing? You got some people that got too much attitude and the people them is concerned and they're talking. The next question I like to ask is, why is it the government don't move all these people who live in on the coastline from Old Road go down? Why? You have sufficient land where you could locate them. Make them move. Go in the parliament and make them move. You see what's happening down there? And you're going to get it more tenser and tenser because this global warming is real. You understand, Mr. Williams? It's real. And you can't wait till life lasts to do these things. We put people to do these things and they must act. They must act. Otherwise, man like me going to abuse them. You understand? It's too long with them people down there being doing this damn nonsense all the time. They give them land, they wouldn't move. They give the grandchildren and the children and still want to stay here. Make them move. The government should make sure that happens. You can't get them on the coastline there and every year they're ball coming here and talking all kind of stupidness. Make the people move. That is where we put the government here for. That's why this fellow Robert Ratchet here will always call. Talk once to run the thing.
Okay.
Talk once. One more thing, Mr. Williams. The people at NEMA, They did a very good job. And we got a lot of negative people. A lot of the vagabond them walking, trying to, say a lot of bad things. But I don't entertain them kind of people here. The people of Nima do a very good job, and I want to give them some pop. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We had quite a number of questions there.
So I want to start with thank the persons who are commending the work of the agency, and I do say that NEMA's staff, we rose to the occasion, and that is what was expected of us, because we have a lot of persons depending on what we do to be able to bring them through any hazard, but most likely the hurricane. And so we are very thankful that persons recognize that the small staff is doing great things, and I will take the commendations back to the office, although I know that they are listening to the program this afternoon. As it relates to the volunteers, you see, that is what it is. Bold and underline, volunteer. We are asking persons to willingly give off their time, knowledge, energy, and effort to come forward and help the agency in executing its duties. We have a process that we allow persons to go through, and you can't catch all the ingenuine things of persons, but we try our best to vet persons as closely as possible. And we're very thankful, because volunteerism is a dying breed. And we ourselves, we just have to be honest in the process, and that is what we expect of our volunteers. And believe me, our volunteers, they work very hard. They put a lot of time into getting the communities ready, getting our shelters ready. They make personal sacrifices to be able to deliver on the expectations of the agency. And though we are very thankful, we know that there are those who may fall by the wayside, and we want to encourage them to continue to remain true to the calling and the processes of the agency, and to be able to not only represent themselves but represent the agency well in whatever they may do, be it in peacetime or in an emergency situation. And we're very thankful for their services.
Now, somebody asked a question about when we have bad weather. You have people who turn meteorologists overnight.
Yes, we do. One of the things that, and anybody who listens to any message that comes from the agency, we always preface our presentation by saying, as informed or as stated by the Met Office of St. Kitts and Nevis, and that clearly indicates by NEMA standard that we do not accept information from any other source. Once the Met Office at RLB doesn't say to NEMA that this is the case, we do not share it. And most times we often try to get the Met Officer to be present in terms of making his presentation or sharing information, as the case may be, which is why the Met Office has a seat in the National Emergency Operations Center, so that we can be updated real time as to what is happening, and that information comes directly from our own authority. So though we may have many persons who are overnight meteorologists, NEMA, the agency with the responsibility of providing near accurate information to the general public of both St. Kitts and Nevis, we take our information from the Met Office of St. Kitts.
Now, there was another question about moving people from the coast, relocating people who are in danger, especially when we have these dangerous sea swells and so on.
And this was the case for Hurricane Maria. We noted very early from the Met Office that we were going to get storm surges, and we were going to get high waves. And so we worked very closely with the security forces, particularly the St. Kitts Nevis Defense Force, in terms of using that loudspeaker or bullhorn and going through the various communities, but most of the communities that would have been affected most by the high tide. And so they were able to tell persons that, it is strongly being recommended. A lot of people use the word mandatory evacuation, but it was strongly being recommended because of the known that we wanted persons to get out. And it was as a precautionary measure so that we do not have them put themselves in harm's way, and at the same time put our first responders, who would have to go and rescue them in the first place, in harm's way. And a lot of people questioned why. There were persons who questioned why we were doing it, and it was uncalled for and it was ridiculous. But I know that the naysayers are now saying, boy, it was a good move, because when you look at that area between New Guinea and Halfway Tree, the seawater came straight to the main road, going past anything that was in its way, be it the dock, the pier, the homes, the rocks, the boulders that were put there as a precaution. It went through everything. And so if persons had stayed in those homes, the story might have been different. And so we are very happy. And I can tell you that this is, for the first time, we've seen persons responding to the call to prepare, responding to the call to evacuate, responding to the call of taking precaution. And so for that, the agency is very thankful, with support from the various stakeholders who helped to get the message out there.
Okay. Now, Mrs. Form, back to you. Now, one of the things, of course, in any disaster, after disaster, is addressing the psychological needs of people. How prepared is the St. Kitts Nevis Red Cross for that?
Okay. Before I answer your question, though, I just need to let the general public know that our senior Met officer is also the president of Red Cross.
Okay.
And when I do work, and I thank the caller for that personal thank you, but actually I wear my emblem, and that's Red Cross. So when I do anything, it is on behalf of. And at this point, I really need to thank the disaster coordinator. She really did a good job, and her deputy, which was in Nevis, because there's 2 islands, and the vice president, St. Kitts. We actually had the cogs going. There's a young guy who works in the office. His name is Kenny. He need a thank you.
Super duper.
Because he really worked. I'm wondering sometimes, where he gets energy of moving the tarpaulins for persons to get their thing. But it's a number of persons that will need a thank you. And then we'll extend to all the volunteers that went out into the field to get the information and take those things around. So the thank you is extended to everybody, and I'll make sure that that is accorded to them as well. One of the things when it comes to psychosocial support, and as I indicated earlier, that we overlook it quite a lot. And you have persons out there in the community would need it post and after the hurricane. I could attest to, we talk about the coastline. There was this gentleman who had his money in his house, and the sea actually came through his house, take the money away, and went back with it in the sea. And when he realized, because we keep telling persons, to move because of what's going to happen. Oh, Natty, I was saying something's going to happen, but it's not happening. But then the general public took the precaution, because remember I mentioned it doesn't happen overnight. And when they realize, yes, it's coming and it's coming to us, then everybody start taking the precaution that this is real. This is happening to us and it's real. We have never had a Cat 5 before, and it's real. I think they saw what happened in Florida. And St. Kitts just holding a little area, the ballpark of Florida, and it is real and it's coming. And they really took that initiative of getting themselves together. So that we have to really say thank you to the citizens. We have, within Red Cross, we try to build our capacity. And in Red Cross, we have within us, we have 2 persons who are trained, one in St. Kitts and one in Nevis in the psychosocial support field. So we're going to get them active. And one, as I said, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week, we're going to be focused on the Zika persons, those pregnant persons. And we're going to get them active in other areas as well. So yes, we'll be prepared for that. If we think that it will beyond our capacity, we'll be able to get persons to come and do that.
And to support what Ms. Foy is saying, I had the opportunity immediately after the all clear to speak to some persons in the communities who came to NEMA to be able to get immediate assistance, and there were some people who were so devastated because although persons felt that we weren't impacted as bad as other countries, our impact was felt. There were persons who lost a lot of their personal effects. They were not able to go to work, some persons. It was just a really bad situation, and so I believe that psychosocial support is very crucial immediately after the all clear, because that's when you capture people at their weakest, when all sorts of things going through their head and they're looking at where they are now from when they were before the storm approached. And I also want to commend the counseling department, Michelle Blake and her staff, because they have already reached out to the agency, and we are going to be discussing how with support from Red Cross, how NEMA and the counseling department can work together to be able to provide that type of support at a community level, on an individual basis, but also for our volunteers and staff at the agency who were able to receive some of these distressing calls and to be able to see persons sometimes at their lowest, and so it can have an effect on us because we are human beings.
Sure.
So I really want to commend the counseling department for reaching out to us.
Okay. Now what mitigation efforts are in place after a disaster?
So mitigation, it starts before and it doesn't end after. It's more or less a continuous process as to how can we improve, how can we build back better, or how can we avoid it from even happening in the first place. And that is why the caller had such a valid point, that persons who live in that area, to be able to mitigate against that. We know we can't stop the ocean from moving forward. It is its natural movement. When you put something in its way, it's uncontrollable. And so to mitigate against that, we really need to consider relocating persons, but not only relocating them, because I have been an advocate that once it is a danger zone and we've provided the opportunity for relocation, we need to take it down. We need to dismantle it. We need to just move it out of the way, because if you leave it standing, persons will do a double whammy and try and use it because they are now out of harm's way. But if there's an opportunity to generate revenue, that's the path they're going to go down, forgetting that in times of disaster it makes you really vulnerable. Yes. And so it is something that I agree with the caller, the government needs to pay very close attention to, because it assists the agency in terms of our ability to respond. And so sometimes mitigation comes first in most cases, because I would much prefer to be on the mitigating side than the responding side.
Now, what in terms of, does Red Cross assist, for example, in getting supplies to Anguilla or St. Martin or Dominica? Is that part of your mission?
Okay, yes. Now, even though our head office is for the English speaking to include Suriname, and you have Anguilla and you have Tortola, who was vastly devastated there under the British, we also we put that out of the window for now. And we realize we have quite a number of citizens, our local citizens are in all of these places. So yes, we are part of the contributors for getting these things out. We send blankets, we send some buckets, we send some depends, and those persons again are overlooked. The adult Pampers, and persons just think about, well, yes, we need food, but these persons again are overlooked. So we assisted so far. Dominica is on our list now of assisting. However, I went to the bank today because we gonna have that out there for some time, because yes, the assistance is needed and everybody is looking now. However, these places, because they were so badly devastated, it's gonna long-term process. So we are gonna have some bank information shortly, which will be sent out to the general public of where they can put some funds in, which we will send directly to the Red Cross there, which will get to the people that is needed. So keep your ears out. We're going to get that bank information out for you, and it should be by Friday. By Friday, we should be able to get that information out there to the general public as to where they can put that monies.
Okay, good.
And you can indicate when you put it, it is for whichever island you prefer.
Sure.
So that we can, when we access it, we can send the money directly to how it is collected for that country.
Okay. Now, Mrs. Stevens, how does NEMA partner with various subcommittees at the national level?
So at a national level, as it relates to the subcommittees, all the subcommittees are represented firstly at a mitigation level. And the mitigation level is where the discussion starts. The Mitigation Council brings all of the heads of departments for government, including the private sector, together to be able to discuss how can we fix or bridge the gaps that we have identified, whether it is from past hurricanes or as we go through the process of developing the necessary programs and policies to guide what we do as an agency. The various national subcommittees, I believe, strengthen the agency's responsibilities. Because we're small, we have a really huge building, and a lot of people think that our staff is 100 plus, but that's not the case. And well, technically it is when you count our volunteers and you count our various partners at the national level. The responsibilities are very specific to the point where you have a national subcommittee that is responsible for relief supplies, spearheaded by Community and Social Development. You have a national subcommittee that is responsible for shelter inspection. You have that national subcommittee that is responsible for transport. You have that national subcommittee responsible for security and so forth. We have all of the critical players are involved. And so the national plan, in my opinion, captures the more critical entities that need to be a part of the decision-making process. And you see the difference between the Mitigation Council, which is what a lot of people question, and the National Emergency Operations Center. The Mitigation Council has a larger number of persons, almost well to 100 persons when you look at all of the various government departments. But the NEOC is very specific, and it captures the entities that can make a decision on the spot to effect change or to be able to bring about an immediate response. And so there are two different things. One is at a strategic planning level, which is the Mitigation Council, and the NEOC means actions to be taken immediately to be able to remedy or respond to whatever the situation is at the time.
Okay. Now I must tell you we are out of time. Is there anything that you would like to say before we leave?
Yes. My lessons learned. What I'm going to say is just a subvention of what will happen. And I think based on what happened, that the government they saw us in action. So we can now look at going to the government, and they might see us in a different light as Red Cross, even though we are a non-governmental organization, to look at this subvention, at least subvention for Red Cross. And that's one of the areas that we're going to be focusing on when we go there, to have that kind of thing in our strategic planning in the future. So that is a critical area that we keep talking about. But however, this is one of the good things come out of those two hurricanes that we had, that we can now go to government and they can see us in the light that we are now talking to them, because they saw it. So we can now go and say, this is it, and hope for a better response than in the past.
So from the agency's standpoint, firstly, I want to remind persons that we are still in the hurricane season, but not just that. This is what we refer to as the peak for the chain of islands for both Windward and Leewards. And so we want persons to continue to remain vigilant. We want persons to continue to listen to the local authorities, including NEMA and the Met Office, because that's where the information will come from real time. And we want persons to continue to, to secure their homes, their surroundings, keep it clean, get rid of the stagnant waters and whatever can hold that water, so that we do not have that vector-borne problem, which is something that is usually affecting countries after a storm. So we are not out of the woods yet, and it's amazing. When we started preparing for Irma and Maria, we started by preparing to be impacted by a category 2, category 3, the highest, and then we went, we took a nap and we woke up and we heard we were at a category 5. And so it shows that anything is possible. So we don't want people to, fall asleep at the wheel. We want people to pay attention and take the necessary actions. I also want to thank the general public for being such good patrons and being able to answer the calls of the agency and being responsible individuals. And at the same time, I want to place on record publicly the appreciation for the staff at the agency for responding so well and doing what we know is expected to be done, because we have a lot of persons who depend on us. And I am not going to single out anyone, because everyone were exceptionally well when it came to being able to respond. I also want to thank our partners and stakeholders and our foreign external support. And we have one entity who has been with us on the ground through Miss Anne Jean-Baptiste from USAID OFDA, and she has been with the agency since Hurricane Irma. She's now back on the ground again, lending us that type of response support, and for that we are very grateful. When an agency such as OFDA takes that type of interest, you have to commend them. Our continued support coming from SIDEMA, and for that we are very grateful. So thank you so much for the opportunity to be on this program.
Okay, I just want to say a quick thank you to our two partners who are here with us on the ground. They came just after Hurricane Maria, and they're still here working along with us and NEMA.
Okay. Well, I want to thank both of you. I want to thank you, Mrs. Fo, the Director General of the St. Kitts and Nevis Red Cross, and Mrs. Claricia Langley Stevens, who is the Deputy National Disaster Coordinator. Many thanks to both of you for coming on this show and to speaking about such a timely topic. I want to thank all of our listeners to today's program. We hope to see you next week for another Working for You. I am your host, Les Roy Williams. Have a good day.
Working for You. A weekly talk radio program which highlights developments of national interest and the activities of your St. Kitts Nevis government. Join host Les Roy Williams as he presents news, views, reports, and interviews about everything regarding the activities of the Team Unity government and the building of our communities and the development of St. Kitts Nevis. Tune in and call in to interact with your government and share your views regarding the upward forward development of your community and our beautiful Twin Island Federation. Working for You is weekly, every Wednesday live from 1:30 p.m. to 3 p.m. on ZIZ Radio, Win FM, and Sugar City FM with rebroadcast on participating stations. Working for You.